Good evening. My name is Eric Banks. I'm the director of the New York Institute for the Humanities at NYU. And it is my pleasure to welcome you here tonight and thank you especially for braving the incoming inclement weather. I think it's tapered off a little bit, so that's very good news. Your reward is the chance to hear tonight two of our most distinguished and provocative men of letters in conversation. And in this case, I can and do need to turn to the fogyish phrase men of letters to describe the marvelous work in all its variety, stage and page, that Akhtar and Rabih Alameddine have produced. They have both made terrific contributions to our lives as readers and as theatergoers, and both are at the top of their creative game. Rabih, as I hope you are aware, has just been honored by being named a National Book Award finalist for fiction for his most recent work, An Unnecessary Woman, while Ayed's work, both on and off Broadway, has received great acclaim from both critics and audiences this fall. The New York Institute for the Humanities at NYU was founded in 1977 to recognize a select group of the city's leading scholars, writers, critics, social thinkers, publishers, editors, and artists, and to give this group of fellows a place where they might commune once a week for thoughtful conversation and reflection about each other's work. The number of fellows has grown to about 250, but we still have our weekly, what was once a brown bag luncheon and is graduated, if you want to call it that, to a more buffet-style presentation. But each Friday we continue to meet. In addition, over the past 4 decades, the Institute has been proud to sponsor public events as well, such as the conversation this evening. In talks and panels like this, such events highlight the many ways in which the humanities serve and address issues crucial to our civic life. Often we're trying to foster a conversation between humanists from within the academy and those from outside of it. But tonight we're happy to hear in Ayed and Rabih from a pair of figures whose work is by its very nature highly public from the start. I am as excited as you are to hear them talk about their craft, to hear what they have to say about its audience and their expectations, and about the many themes that overlap in both of their work, bodies of work. Before I introduce our moderator tonight, Amitava Kumar, and turn the stage over to him, I want to thank a few people who have helped to make this evening a possibility. In particular, I'd like to thank Aaron Malkin of the New York Theater Workshop, where Ayed's new play, or newish play, I should say, The Invisible Hand, will begin its previews this week. And Deb Singer, Vice President, Director of Publicity at Grove Atlantic, as well as John Mark Bowling, also at Grove Atlantic, which is the publisher this year of Rabih's fantastic novel, An Unnecessary Woman. Without the support of Aaron, Deb, and John Mack, I don't think we would have been able to bring these panelists together this evening. We also benefited from the sage advice of Anderson Tepper, who's a tireless advocate of quality literature, particularly literature and translation, so we thank him. The Associate Director of the Institute, Stephanie Steicher, has worked tirelessly to make this event as seamless as possible, and we'd like to acknowledge that. And of course, we thank Rabih, Ayed, and Amitava for coming out to join us tonight in conversation. As a reminder, we have copies of books by all three of our panelists for sale over here, and we hope you take advantage of this outside and send our nice bookseller home empty-handed. Also, I would like to ask you to check now and make sure that your cell phones are turned off. Now, please allow me to introduce our distinguished moderator for this evening's conversation. Amitava Kumar is the author of several works of literary nonfiction, including the award-winning book, A Foreigner Carrying in the Crook of His Arm a Tiny Bomb, described by the New York Times as a perceptive and soulful meditation on the cultural and human repercussions of the global war on terror. His other titles include Passport Photos, Bombay, London, New York, Husband of a Fanatic, and A Matter of Rats, a short biography of Putnam. His latest book, Lunch with a Bigot, will be published by Duke University Press in April 2015. His writings have appeared in Harper's Magazine, The Nation, The New York Times, The Chronicle of Higher Education, Critical Inquiry, The Indian Express, American Prospect, and numerous other venues. He is Helen D. Lockwood Professor of English at Vassar College. Please join me in welcoming Amitava Kumar, Ayed Akhtar, and Rabih Alameddine. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. It's an honor to be here with these two writers I admire, which we all admire. I'll read out two brief paragraphs of introduction. But before that, I just wanted to say that, we feel a sort of a stirring as readers that the world outside our window or on our television screen appears on the pages of the book that we are reading. And we somehow, along with the sense of recognition that takes place there, we also have a sort of an expectation that the writer we are reading will in some ways give shape to the sense of recognition that we have of the world taking outside our window. And a different kind of recognition happens when the reader, holding the book in her hand, looks up and sees on a bookshelf other books with which the book that she is holding is in conversation. And that's another way in which the world enters the experience of the reader holding the book in her hand. And I had, reading the work of these two fine gentlemen in the last few days, both these experiences. So that in a very live way, what was on my television screen was also in what I was reading. And then the books that I've been reading over the past few months and years were also appearing on the pages of the book that I was reading. That's very, I think these are two very different experiences, and still they overlap. So that's something as readers, because that's how we have gathered here today, to celebrate the work of two important writers, we must in some ways meditate upon. Brief introductions. Rabih Alameddine is the author most recently of the novel An Unnecessary Woman, which has been shortlisted for the National Book Award. He has also authored other acclaimed novels, including the international bestseller The Hakawati, I, the Divine, Kool-Aids, as well as the short story collection The Perv. A delightful title.
Thank you.
Rabih divides his time between Beirut and San Francisco. Among his various recognitions is a 2002 Guggenheim Fellowship. On Wednesday, I'll have my fingers like this and several other limbs crossed. I hope the best book wins. Ayad Akhtar won the Pulitzer Prize for Drama in 2013 for his play Disgraced. Disgraced played at LCT3, Lincoln Center Theatre in 2012, and is currently enjoying a run on Broadway. Very shortly, another of his explosive plays, The Invisible Hand, about an American banker held hostage by jihadists in Pakistan, will open at the New York Theatre Workshop. I believe that happens on December 8th. His latest play, The Who and the What, premiered at La Jolla Playhouse earlier this year and will be opening in New York at LCT3, Lincoln Center Theatre, in June 2014. Ayad is able to do all of this because he doesn't have a personal life, doesn't have children, etc. It's important to note in any biography.
They always ask me.
These important details. He is the author of the novel American Dervish and the prize-winning screenwriter of the film The War Within. He has been the recipient of fellowships from McDowell and Yaddo. How many of you have watched Disgraced? Several of you. A critical mass. All right.
No, they're still here, so that's good.
An ordinary conversation, you know, over pork tenderloin, no less, and fennel salad, what was it?
Fennel anchovies.
And anchovy salad.
Sounds awful, doesn't it?
Suddenly, you know, what can we do here on stage that will similarly incite a discussion like
I'm not going to hit you, Amitava.
No.
Don't worry.
Nope. And no anchovies.
Rabih might, but I'm
no
not
anchovies for me.
Well, there is one passage in Rabih's novel where he imagines a conversation like this. It's on... Do you mind reading this paragraph?
Oh, not at all. I have to read it first so that I see if I'm embarrassing myself or not. Oh, I used to dream that one day I'd have friends over for dinner, and we'd spend the entire evening in Spartan conversation about literature and art, laughing and cavorting and making merry, while the unwit and sassy, delightful repartee parried back and forth across the room. My salon would be the envy of the world, if only the world knew about it. In one of his poems, Brodsky suggested that dreams spurn a skull that has been perforated. A spectacularly thick drill has punctured mine.
Thank you. So that will be the tenor of this evening.
Oh, how lovely.
Because we are not going to hit and spit on each other. So what's going to happen is this other thing will happen.
Perforating skulls?
No, but in terms of talking about art,
Yeah.
talking about literature, you know, when people, we were told that we'd be talking a little bit about the Muslim world.
Great.
And the Muslim world that we are introduced to here is certainly on the streets of Beirut or other things, but also the pervasive feeling is that of a woman's attention to literature.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted you to talk a little bit about this focus of yours in that book.
Well, I can tell you that my focus when I was writing the book was not on the Muslim world.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had this discussion. I'm not sure exactly what that word means. So I was writing about a woman, and specifically a woman in Beirut and her relationship to society. It actually wasn't that interesting to me that it's in Beirut as much as that was just what I knew.
Yeah.
So that she is a Muslim, I think, by birth, though not, like, as I said, not by inclination. She's not that interested in the religion. And it's interesting to me. I mean, we sort of had this conversation a little earlier as to how we define a Muslim world and how we define a Muslim, and that the identity of that. I was not born a Muslim. I'm a Druze, which is a really weird religion, but by choice I'm an unbeliever. My sister is married to a Muslim, and he's an unbeliever. But the idea of all of a sudden then that if you are a Muslim, that defines you as an identity. And I find that fascinating. Like, why am I not defined by the fact that I'm a soccer player?
Are you?
I am.
Okay.
You know, why am I not defined by the fact that I am under 5'7"? That influences my life a lot more than where I'm from. But we get stuck. And the trouble for me, which I love talking about it. I don't object because it brings up the conversation, is that when we talk about the Muslim world, what we're saying is that we are talking about the other. Okay, that it's not us. Like, you know, we can write about somebody in Kansas, even though we would have here in New York nothing in common with someone in Kansas. We never think of them as the other, but say that somebody is from Pakistan, or, oh my God, Saudi Arabia, or, oh my God, Iran. It becomes other. Their situation no longer is about, you know, what it means to be human, what it means to live with dignity, what it means to have a family. It becomes what it means to be a Muslim, or what it means to be the other. And that, to me, is a fascinating subject. Now, and I'm sure Ayad is the same, I write about the other because in many ways, I think that almost all writers are. This is what we do. We're both part of the community that we're in, and we're apart. But it is not the fact that I come from whether a Muslim country or a Christian country or whatever that separates it. It's a different thing.
There's a great passage where your protagonist, in An Unnecessary Woman, thinks about why people think, reading Dostoevsky, that you have understood the Russian soul.
Mm-hmm.
She protests against this idea because she doesn't want it to be
representative.
Yes. Now that's the same struggle That's the same complaint that you have had, in a way, when you have said, I'm trying to use the particular
Right.
to write about the universal.
Mhm.
Can you say a little bit more?
Well, can I say more? Yeah, I probably can. My path to the particular was particular to me, and it took me a long time. I spent a long time as I had a Thai school teacher who made me want to become a writer, and that was 15, and then I'm 44, so it's been 19 years that I've wanted to be a writer, or 29 years. Can't even do math. See, that's why I became a writer, because I get through math. 29. Thank you. 29 years that I've been doing this.
But you look as if it's only 15.
I was not fishing for that compliment, but I appreciate it. Thank you. She made me, and she loved Central European modernism. So like I read a lot, all that stuff in high school. Like I read more of that stuff than most complet majors had read by the time they got out of Brown. And Musil and Kafka and Mann and all that, Rilke, Broke, yada yada yada. And it was great. It was a great reading education. It was a great. The imprimatur was deep and strong, and it made me feel for many years, a good 15 years, maybe more, that writing in a universal way was like writing like some modernist writer from a Swiss village.
Yeah.
And it barred the way to my own experience, my own community, my own family, my own life. And so at some point in my early mid-30s, I started to understand that I was sort of running from, I was trying to be a writer that I was never going to be, and that I frankly could never finish the Book of Disquiet, but I was trying to write a Book of Disquiet. It's a very odd, paradoxical situation that I was in, aspiring to be something that I was not. Suffice it to say, lots of reasons, most of them very painful. As Kierkegaard says, life, someday the screws of life will tighten upon you like, as upon a rack, and force what's truly inside you to come out. So, the screws tightened. And I started to understand my way to my subject matter, or just myself as a writer. And that was the particular, that is to say, what I know. It just turns out that because of my history, my preoccupations, the fact that I had the life that I have and have had the life and the interests that I've had, philosophically, religiously, et cetera, that has situated me and my interiority in this very, very unique, well, maybe not unique, but very pregnant moment, and where what I have to say or what I have to express or explore seems to meet the world in this unusually direct way. That's a bit cloying, but it's mostly true.
But what was the turning point, though? What made the change? But which years are we talking about?
Well, it was my mid-30s, basically, like 34 to like 38. That was like the screws, you know what I mean? Like, am I going to continue to be insolvent? Am I going to allow my marriage to disintegrate? Yes. Am I going to continue to knock my head up against this wall, even though everybody I know thinks I'm insane? I have no prospects. I have no agent. I live in this tiny one bedroom. I can barely make rent. How long can I sustain that? 3-4 years. The shifting climate here in New York around identity, my own relationship with the world and how that was shifting. And, I had this wonderful teacher, Jerzy Grotowski, when I was in my early 20s, legendary Polish theater director, who said that you only acquire craft when you have something to lose. That craft is actually not about doing scales or exercises. Craft is acquired in moments of difficulty and moments of potential failure. And the closer you are to existential failure as an artist, the deeper the acquisition of craft. And so that time, oddly, was actually the most fertile time for me. It was the time when I really came to understand craft in a different way. So it was a glorious thing, all of that abnegation and deprivation. And I think deeply I knew that. Like there was some part of me that it was kind of what could sustain me, is that I could feel that I was growing in some way. I had been doing it long enough that I started asking certain questions about myself as a person, but I was asking them through craft. You sort of articulate the things that you go through, and it's why I stopped playing golf so much in my 20s. I was like, I can't be having all these amazing realizations on the golf course. These have got to happen at the desk.
Yes.
So, yeah.
They never happen on a soccer field.
I don't believe that.
You're out to get somebody. That's.
Have you quoted failure in that form? And did it
Courted
signify
failure. Courted. That's a difficult thing. No, I agree completely that it is, as much as I hate to admit it, it's at my most desperate that I can't even sit down to write if I'm not desperate. You know, I will do anything, and I mean anything not to write. Anything. Facebook, Twitter, Sudoku, soccer, Arsenal scores, you name it, anything. The only time I start writing when it gets, I call it desperate, where it's actually, I don't want to make it romantic, but it's actually more painful not to write than to write. But I don't court it because it is painful. You know, I wrote my first book at probably the lowest. Actually, I've written every single book at the lowest. I think I can't get any lower than this, and yet I'm proved wrong. But no, I don't think I would court that.
Say more. What do you mean by saying that you have written every book at your lowest?
I get to the point, like my first book. I was a painter at the time. I was relatively successful. I thought I was a fraud and all that, but I had to wait until I got dumped by my ex. And he said some things that were so, just like the entire relationship, where he said some things that were so insulting while trying to be nice. He said something, he was writing this book, and he says, "Oh, I'm being creative just like you." And I sat down, and I wrote a book with him not in it. It was desperate. The worst, I think, was probably Hakawati, when it was this whole, my father was dying, I was having a lot of issues. I was in Beirut for about 8 months, and I was teaching, which is hell. If you ever want to know the depth of despair, teach. And there came a time when I sat down to write, and I've talked about it before, but it's difficult to explain, really, that I could not understand how one word would connect to another. That I knew that sentences can be formed, but I lost the ability to actually form them. I think that was sort of my freakiest. And no, I did not take any drugs.
Now, Rabih said that he can use, he can go on Facebook or Twitter to waste time. One of the fascinating things that Rabih has been doing on Twitter is introduce his followers to various works of art. It's quite stunning, actually. How did you decide that painting, there's something in common between you guys. He was an actor for a while, gave that up, decided he was going to be a writer. You have been painting, but you always knew or realized that writing was going to be your main vocation. So I wanted to ask both of you, because we have also to discuss craft. How do you come to a place where you thought that was the form where yourself would find its proper expression?
Do you want to take that first, or?
Are you throwing it to me? Because
I'm willing to talk about it, but
please.
The thing for me is that it's not about, again, I don't want to make it sound romantic, but it's not about choice. I was painting by choice. I did not come to writing by choice. I've always wanted to, and it is, in some ways, I've always been a reader. What I love about painting is the joy of it, but the whole time that I was painting, I knew I was a fraud, that I could paint and my paintings are good, but I was coming at them through accident, which there's nothing necessarily wrong by it. But I mean, I've talked about this before. I was in '95, I think. I was at the Matisse exhibit at MoMA here, and I realized that I could not go on painting. That there is such a thing as, of course, none of us are Matisse, you know, but there is such a thing as to what I was doing and what he was doing was not the same thing. I was an amateur and will always be an amateur in terms of painting. It was a love of painting that I liked. I don't feel that about writing. I think there are writers who are better than me, but I have something to say. You know, I'm not threatened. I'm threatened by some, not a lot. I beat them up a little. But the writing becomes sort of a more natural. I grew up as a reader. I've always been, you know, in some ways, a direct relationship with books. My father, before he passed away, he reminded me, like, he asked me when I was 4, what did I want to do when I grew up? And I said I wanted to be a writer. And at that time, I wanted to write Superman comics and Batman, you know, and Lulu. The whole idea is of an involvement, an interaction, an intimate relationship with books. I love painting. I was once jokingly said that I'm willing to move to Norman, Oklahoma because they have 2 vineyards in the small museum. That is enough. But it's sort of more that I see it as opposed to that it's an expression of me.
What about you, my friend? What made you think that writing rather than acting?
Well, I mean, I always wanted to be a writer. I mean, I went to, you know, I had this teacher in high school, and then I went to college and wrote my first short story in fiction class, and teachers called me into his office and said, this is the best short story I've read by a student, and really great short story. I think you should send it to the New Yorker and the Atlantic. Here are their addresses. I know the editors. I think you got a good shot at getting published. I don't know if you will, but I think you got a good shot. And I was sort of overjoyed. And
what was the story about? Sorry to interrupt.
Let me tell the story. The story took place in a Pakistani village, and it was related to things that I had seen as a young boy in my father's village. The vividness of life back in what my parents called back home was startling to me, the distinction between how I felt when I was there and how I felt when I was in America. So I walked out of his office and I thought to myself, I'm never going to send this story to anybody because I don't know where this story came from. And if I put it in a magazine, people are going to ask me for another one, and I have no idea how to do that. And I think there was a knowing in that. I was 17, and I think it was a knowing in that I wasn't ready. I was not ready for the double regard of a writer's life.
Very good.
The observation of life and the living of life. And I knew on some fundamental level I had a lot to learn. Anyway, the long shot of it is that I wasn't able to write anymore, even though I tried to. I wasn't able to. Sort of tumbled into a kind of a depression, and then eventually ended up leaving school. And I had a friend who was directing plays, and he was like, you'd be great in this play, and we'd get you out of the house, you'd have fun. And I did, and I got out of the house, and I was having fun. I was meeting girls, and it was great. So I thought, you know what, I should do this, and I had a knack for it. So I did, and I majored in college, I majored in theater, and then I had this amazing opportunity to work with Grotowski in Italy for a year, and then I came back to New York and started working with Andre Gregory. I was teaching acting with Andre Gregory at 24 years old, and all these amazing, meeting all these amazing people, hanging out with like Deborah Eisenberg and Wally Shawn, and all these really cool like literary and theater people, and everybody was in therapy. So I thought to myself, wow, I guess I should go to therapy, right? So I'm 25 at the time when I decided to go to therapy. So I start going to therapy, and there's this recurring dream I start having almost immediately, which is it's a dark and stormy night like tonight, and there's a knocking at my door, and I open the door, and there's this stunted, beaten up man who's bleeding from the head, and I need to take him inside and care for him and feed him, and he's a writer. Like it's a recurring dream, right? And so I probably didn't need to be paying a therapist as much as I was to know that maybe I should start writing again, or that it might be helpful for me to do that. So I did, and I wrote a first novel, which was this 650-page thing that I thought was so amazing, and it was not. But again, failure, learning the craft. So all of that time I've also done, because I started acting and had these amazing experiences in the theater, and so many of my best friends, when I first came to New York, started working in movies, and I started working in the movies, and I was doing that and writing at the same time, writing in the morning or writing in the evening, you know, working a day job, making industrials, and going home and writing in the evening, and I've always done that. So it wasn't really so much a choice as it was, I knew what I wanted to do. It just took me a very, very long time to actually learn how to do it with any sophistication or aplomb, you know what I mean?
Now, when you were in school, your models with the high school teacher, your models were the Central European writers.
Yeah.
While reading you, I often found myself asking, would someone like Hanif Qureshi have been an inspiration, or even, for example, Rushdie?
I had a complicated relationship with Rushdie. I read Satanic Verses when I was in college, and I was blown away, and I was also profoundly bothered by it.
Sure.
Because I was not a practicing Muslim at the time, but I felt the gesture.
Yeah.
It was not, whatever he says or people say about it, it was intentional in some way. And I've come to understand the importance of that gesture. But it was a gesture, and it was one that I was not sure sat with me in a way that I could build on. I think probably with another few years perspective, you know, I'm in the 4 works into a series of 7, the American Dervish and then the 3 plays, and I have 2 more novels and a film that I'm working on now. And I think once I get done with that, I think I maybe will look back and say that in a way Rushdie, that at least that reading of Satanic Verses was a central creative inspiration for me. But I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure how much I'm in dialogue with, which probably is the answer to the question. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Right. You should ask a therapist about it.
Yeah, right. I knew I never should have brought that up. I got the laugh, but I'm going to pay for it later.
Another session with a therapist will cure you.
I've been having sessions for the last 15 years. Trust me, nothing cured me.
You're very calm on the eve of a very big night.
Well,
so clearly you're doing something right.
It's absolutely drugs. I'm joking. I try not to think about it, but yes, it's an inner turmoil and outer peace. Yeah.
It's still Wednesday.
No, right.
Right.
For whatever it's worth, I agree with you. It is a gesture. I don't understand how anybody says that, you know, Satanic Verses were not a gesture, and I loved it. It needed to be said at the time. The trouble, if anything that bothers me right now about all the Islamophobia that's around and stuff, is that it makes my making fun of Islam not funny. I used to be such glee to like, ooh.
Well, you should come see Disgraced. People spend a lot of time making fun of Islam. So.
And not in necessarily a mean way. Just just have fun, you know.
That's to me the way I articulate it. I think you probably would have, or you might have a different perspective on it, or maybe a larger perspective on it. But I talk about it in terms of American experience. Is that if you look at the sort of example of the great Jewish American writers post-war,
absolutely.
What is that experience? That experience is self-criticism, self-mockery, the process of making your own making anew what is your own, what is your tradition, and finding a way through comedy, through laughter, to the heart of the American experience.
I mean, and the only thing that I worry about, I mean, I can't do not funny, it's just not me, is that I have to be a little careful because a lot of the criticism of Islam is coming from idiots. Okay, that my making fun of it should not be added to the cacophony, and I assume yours isn't.
Well, no, it is. I mean, trust me, people. Yeah, we could tell you
it's
stories until the
a
days
different
come
thing.
home.
It's a different
until the
thing.
cows come home.
So that's the thing that it used to be so much fun and glee to just like, ooh, let me make fun of this, let me make fun of that. Now I have to be a little bit more careful. I can still make fun of the Pope.
Not for much longer.
I know. It's like he's getting defenders now.
Rabih, you shrugged off the gesture through which folks from elsewhere, you do not want to accept that burden, which is often the brown person's burden of carrying the weight of otherness. But what I found appealing about your book was that we were also getting the news from elsewhere. We were, when Alia says that it was a funny statement for me. Alia says, when she read books by these other writers, she means the Western writers, she was introduced to a world where there was electricity and things right on time and this happened. So she's talking a little bit about the aberrations of her own quotidian routine, and she's presenting her difference on her own terms, etc. I think the twin act of both expressing how things are similar across geographical differences, and also at the same time trying to point out differences, particularities, is the task of a writer. Yeah?
I mean, whether it's me or Ayad, I mean, as we talked about it, it's either making the particular universal and the universal particular, making the familiar strange and the strange familiar. The whole idea is I consider bad literature or bad plays that basically reflect the culture exactly back to the viewer or the reader, so that there is, right away you feel an empathy with the writer, with the protagonist or the actor, so that there's practically no thinking involved. It's just like, oh, this is us, this is how we stand. That makes for Disney movies and Hollywood movies. There's nothing wrong with them, but that becomes a little less interesting.
Yes.
What is interesting is to see something that is completely different, to be able to both empathize and see the difference. Make someone see from a different angle, not necessarily as the other, or even if as the other. It's not about, the word I was talking to another friend, the word empathy is thrown around here, and it has become for me like an insult that I empathize with your character. It's like, fuck you.
Is that the title of your next book? I thought it might be.
No. It's nothing special. It's not unique to me. It is what a writer is supposed to do. It's what an artist is supposed to do. It's make you look at the world at an altered angle. Make you see yourself and see your world in an altered angle. If I was once heard this sort of writer telling the students that, oh, a character in a novel has to transform, there has to be an arc. And my first reaction was like, no, the reader has to be transformed. If I watch a painting, I don't want to see the writer. I want to see me. What am I becoming by seeing this? And that becomes sort of the interaction between writer and reader, or artist and viewer. It is an interaction.
Yes.
Can I
of course,
build on
sir.
something that Rabih was talking about? I think that increasingly we find ourselves in this, it's obviously post-late capitalist moment. The market has come to express a kind of mythic totality for us. They speak about the church 800 years ago. We talk about the economy today as this guiding principle of rules, comportments, concepts, beliefs that order the decision-making of nation-states and individuals and et cetera, et cetera. In that landscape, the politics of empathy, likability, relatability, one of the ways in which that is operating is as the humanities, or the great tradition, finding a way to articulate its utility to the larger economic whole, which is, represents on some fundamental level a recognition that art is not meaningful to us, actually, because it is reducible to the same kind of justifying terms that we would use to make decisions about the budget of a department or a corporation or what have you. And so I fully agree with everything Rabih is saying when it comes to empathy. I think the matter, certainly as an artist who is called to carry the burden of the other, one of the things it appears that people would like me to do is to change their idea about Islam. They have this awful idea about Islam. They know it must be wrong, but they want to know how. How is it wrong? Show me. Make me feel it. And my response to that is that the cultural utility of a work of art is not judged by my capacity to change your idea about something. That's actually not the purpose. I think that's all I want.
No, you can't.
No, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Dramatic writer, he has left us spoiled at the end.
That's right.
No,
I don't know what I was trying to say other than to respond in a finance industrialist articulation of what Rabih's talking about when we talk about empathy, relatability, likability. The quiddity of a character.
Quiddity of a character. What a nice phrase.
Right. The quiddity of a character is fascinating to us to the extent that it is not a reflection of our own narcissism, but the reflection of something other that is so compelling to us that we are forced to continue to try to understand what it may be. And that process of continually trying to engage, as Camus once said of Kafka, his great gift was to make people read his stories over and over. Presenting the quiddity of a character with such richness and inscrutability is actually the mark of doing good work. And yet that's not relatable per se, or likable, certainly if it's a Muslim character, because it's not a character who's trying to get you to like him or her.
Some Muslims want you to like, though. My nephew's 12. He wants people to like you.
Sure. But I'm speaking specifically about my own dilemma with some of the work that I'm involved in.
For those who are impressed by Ayad's employment of the language of the language of analysis that lays bare the structure of late capitalism, etc. All you have to do is watch the play that is going to open in the New York Theatre Workshop, because there's a stunning grasp of how the market works, including all the terminology that one expects the Wall Street types to have under their finger. It's great.
Can I plug it, actually?
Please do. The
American investment banker, American investment banker advisor, white, working in emerging markets in Pakistan, gets kidnapped by a local extremist militia. When he's kidnapped, the group that is kidnapping him ends up getting some attention, getting put on this terrorist list. So his company, Citibank, cannot negotiate his ransom. It's against U.S. anti-terrorism laws. The second in command realizes they have this traitor, and the banker sort of realizes he can use his trading skills to raise his own ransom off of the capital that he can accumulate. And so they turn the prison room into a trading room, and over the course of 17 scenes wreak some very serious havoc on the Pakistani market. Right. So, The Invisible Hand.
The Invisible Hand.
Come see it, folks.
Part of the attention is Islam, certainly jihad, but much of the attention is on the machinations of...
Yeah, but it's a tradition of jihad that takes us into the Marxist history of post-colonial Muslim identity. There's a very long tradition going way back, but certainly folks like, you know, Abdu and the Muslim Brotherhood, and I mean, just where this idea, this fundamental sort of guiding principle of the Ummah as ultimately as a socialist conscience, socialist consciousness overlapping with a Marxist analysis. And so equality, equity, has been a dream of the Ummah for many hundreds of years. You know, this is a history that in the West are not so familiar with, because we have a particular way of seeing Islam as particularly, you know, barbaric and, but anyway, so the idea that the jihad here is a jihad that matches up with the intentions of jihad as Occupy Wall Street sees jihad, you know.
The fundamentalism of late capitalism.
Right, exactly.
Where, you know, you must wonder, where did he go to school? You know, he's the guy who put Brown back in Brown University. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Okay, listen, we are kind of running out of time, so we should open up.
On that note,
no, we should open it. We should open it to the multivalent character of the audience, because there are all kinds of things happening. You know, because that's what's happening in your play. Please. Oh, there's a mic. There's a mic.
Can you talk about how one play led to the other, and character development, and where you started and what you liked, and then what you were exploring in the next one, and how it led to the next?
Oh, interesting. So in this process that I was describing earlier of sort of fleeing myself and then coming to myself, I began to have this experience in my as I said earlier, my mid-30s, where I started to realize I was running from my own background in a way. I was trying to be something that I wasn't, and I had sort of meditated and been to therapy long enough to know that maybe the best response to this was stillness, not reactivity. So metaphorically speaking, I sort of began to look over my shoulder at what I perhaps had been running from, and there was a kind of explosion of creativity. I kind of hit a vein, and that vein is what all of this work, all these 7 things that I'm talking about, the 4 that I've written, the 3 that I'm still working on, came from that moment, really. I'm still mining that. So all of them, they were interwoven. It was like following one thread leading into another. You know, at the end of Disgraced, Abe, if you've seen it, Abe walks off stage and you're not sure what's going to happen with this kid. And 7 years later, a character like him from the West shows up in Pakistan in the next play, The Invisible Hand. So there are these interlinking connections between all of the works, but they're not obvious. For those who know the work, they're there, but they're not obvious. You know, as far as how do I know something, it's really, does it work or not? You know, it's less about whether I like it or whether it expresses what I want it to express. I'm not a big fan of my own intentionality. I find that the work seems to have, when it comes from the body and when it comes from the encounter with the audience, it has a richness and a body that it doesn't have when I'm trying to make it do something. So the process of getting a play up, being in previews, as I will be next week with some of my friends here from New York Theater Workshop. They know how crazy I can get in previews, but it's a really glorious moment because that's when you can feel the audience and you can change the work day to day based on what you're feeling with the audience.
Someone else?
I have seen 2 of your plays and look forward to the one across the street.
Thank you, ma'am.
The theme is troubling, and I'm wondering, what are you trying to get us to think about Americans who have a background with Islam? What's your intention?
My intention is to offer you a experience with a Disgraced of Aristotelian catharsis, which is to say, Aristotle defines, we have this denatured idea of what catharsis is. Oh yeah, I have some expression of emotion. Aristotle's very precise about what catharsis is. It is the expression of emotion through pity and terror. We have come to feel that pity, empathy, and the expression of emotion through empathy is the meaningful act. In the tragic arc, tragedy, as the Greeks understood it, a mass form, not a noble, refined form, but a form that occasioned pity and terror, Aristotle's paradigmatic example of terror is when the Furies arrived in one of Aeschylus's plays, women miscarried in the aisles, right? That's a completely different notion of catharsis. So Aristotelian tragedy, empathy, and terror through the experience of dealing with the most terrifying issue of our time. It offers an artist the opportunity for a level of audience engagement that is unusual. That's it. The rest is on you.
Someone else? PhD students, please take note. Aristotle and the global war on terror. It's a subject. Someone else? Thoughts, comments, questions? Please, go ahead.
For Ayad, I'm just curious if from a timeline standpoint there was any correlation between you shedding the more traditional literary forms that weren't serving your writing and you're finding yourself as your more modern Muslim identity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was the poster child for postcolonial delusional identity, you know what I mean, wanting to be, you know, I didn't even grow up in the subcontinent and I wanted to be the English gentleman. Like, how crazy is that? You know what I mean? And I didn't even know it, which was even worse, because at least if you grow up in the subcontinent, you know you're trying to ape those English people and you know you probably shouldn't be doing it. So I was not even aware of any of that. A lot of that came through the imprimatur of my own family, and, you know, my mother was, you know, brought up by convent nuns, and so she had a whole thing with the English. And so being white has always been a very, very, I have aspired to be white. I'm not white. And I didn't have the experiences of growing up as a white guy. I mean, I lived in Milwaukee with a lot of white people, and I loved them. They were great. But I was not them. And so at some point, I think that was no longer a concept to me. It actually was an experience that I understood this disjuncture. The disjuncture was not so much that it was painful. It was painful that there was a disjuncture. It wasn't painful that I wasn't white. It was just painful that I was not the thing I was trying to be and wished I could be, and if I could only be that thing, then maybe I would be something. And it was being played out through this very long literary heritage of which everybody was white. Surprise, surprise. Nothing wrong with it. Some of my best friends are white.
That's the title of his next play.
No, it's the title of Disgraced. And I say that in a kind of a provocative, playful way, just to bring home the pungency of that issue. It's to give you a sense of the roughness of the feel of that process.
What does it mean to be a non-believing Muslim?
That's for you.
I'm not a Muslim. I'm a Druze. An unbelieving Muslim is like a non-believing Christian, is somebody who was born into a Christian family.
Maybe you could speak about Aliyah in that term, because
it's the character in our part of the world, in Lebanon, specifically in Lebanon, your religion is decided by birth, what family you're born into. So that she was born into a Muslim family, but she was never a believer. So, you know, that's what an unbelieving Muslim family. I mean, it's like, this is why, going back to a little bit about the Muslim world, the Muslim world is huge, if you want to call it whatever that means. Lebanon is like nothing else that I know of. You know, I'm sure Pakistan and different areas in Pakistan are like nothing else. So in Lebanon, some people practice, you know, they go to the mosque. Most people that I know are Muslim by birth, but they couldn't tell you one thing from the other, you know.
But they would always be Muslim in terms of their social
classification. like my brother-in-law, the poor thing, is a Muslim Shiite. That's what it says on his card. But I can tell you for a fact that he's a die-hard atheist, whereas his father and mother are believers. You know, so they actually like read the Quran and pray. He wouldn't. I probably know how to pray more than he does. But I mean, is he a Muslim? Is he? It's difficult. This is what I mean. It's like we don't have one word that describes everybody.
Rabih, can you please tell us a little bit about your literary influences, whether you grew up bilingual or trilingual, and how your reading experience growing up in Arabic compared to your later
I am trilingual.
English language.
I am trilingual. Probably English is my strongest reading language, primarily because Arabic is, there's a difference between classical reading Arabic and speaking Arabic. I speak it well. I speak Lebanese dialect really well. I can read it, but it's, I can read everything. It's just difficult to write. It's not the language that I think in. Literary influences is a big subject, because I actually am most of my bigger literary influences happened later in life. You know, whether it's, shall we call them the brown guys, Naipaul and Rushdie, and or the, you know, Pessoa or whatever. They all came later in life. My earlier were just fun stuff. You know, I read everything. When I was 12, I used to think Jacqueline Suzanne was God. You know, Harold Robbins, my God. You know, I read everything. You know, whatever we lived, I grew up in Kuwait, and there wasn't much to read. And my mother was a big reader, so we'd go to what we call the expat bookstores, and I would buy anything. You know, just from The Day of the Jackal to Robert Ludlum to, you know, I think the first, what I would call real big influence, was A House Where Mr. This Was, when I was 16. And it was like, oh. Mm-hmm. You know, and whether it's a great book or not, it was the first book where it was third worlders, and we were not the, you know, the servants.
Sorry, which book? The House for Mr. Biswas by V.S. Naipaul.
It was the first one where I felt, oh, that family, I mean, it had nothing to do with me. They were in Trinidad, and it was an Indian family and stuff. But there was an affinity, but they were not having, you know, tea in the afternoons. And, you know, it was not a Jane Austen. It was not. That book just changed my life. It was the first, you know, and then it was a descent into hell.
Part of the confounding part of thinking about Islam for us non-Islam is the Sunni Shia, and within that the tribal. And you probably look at the Irish Protestant Catholic and think the same thing.
No,
no,
I feel like
you
I
don't.
get it. I feel like I get it.
You get it. So maybe you could expound on how you as a Muslim, I don't know, think about that or write about that or help us. Maybe this isn't the spot to talk about that, but it's a confounding thought to me.
Well, in brief, when the Prophet Muhammad died, here's a guy, the Prophet Muhammad, he's got it all. Direct connection to God. You got a problem, you go to him, he tells you how to fix it. Everybody loves him. He's got this community, people are happy, whatever. This is the story. Then he dies. Who's gonna tell us what to do now? Who's got the connection to God? Well, you know, he's got a family. So maybe his family has a connection. And so like, no. Prophet Muhammad's one thing, family's another. We're gonna create a council and we're gonna decide who should be the next leader. The council is the Sunnis, the family is the Shias. That simple. Now, that created centuries and centuries of back and forth and whatever you want to, and that has been used. This is not excusing the mindless barbarism of so many in that part of the world, but that has been used, that schism, in the Great Game. It has been used by, I mean, anybody wants to know why we got ISIS right now, all you got to do is look at decision making from March 2003 to August 2014, and the series of mishaps time and time again by the Bush and Obama administrations. And to think that we would not have ISIS, that would be a remarkable outcome, actually. So you know, that's the nutshell of Sunni Shia. For those of you who have better version of it, please, by all means, grab the mic.
I have a question to Ravi. Do you think that you use humor? Like, I'm actually a poet and a therapist, and I believe that laughter comes to some extent from shame. And do you think that because it is impossible to explain, I hate the word identity, but these bits and pieces of who you are, the self, you have to use humor? Because really, it is really impossible to explain in English. Where are you from? How it all works in your mind? How it all worked in through your family history, through your whatever immigration it is, or migration it is, or multiple migrations, etc.
I will attempt to answer, because this would take really 12 years of therapy to talk about humor. Yeah, no, I'm serious. Humor is both a way in and a defense mechanism. It's that simple. For me, I have found that the easiest way to communicate and to break through barriers is through humor, and the easiest way to defend myself is through humor. Yes, it is also the only thing that keeps me sane in an insane world, where I feel that I am being constantly attacked, whether it's overtly or it's through humor. If I talk about my narrator, I would say everybody keeps saying, oh, it's a tragedy. It is not a tragedy, because she has a sense of humor. It is, for me, one of the ways of how we deal with the world. And I find as I grow older, I have little patience with people who don't have a sense of humor. So forget all the depth of identity or you know, the philosophical discussions of what it means to use humor. For me, it's the lubricant that oils. I like people who make me laugh. It makes it human.
Mike Nichols has a wonderful thing. He says, a hero of his story is the character with the most jokes. Yes. The one who gives the audience the most pleasure, the reader the most pleasure. That's the one.
And it is both. Again, I do understand the distancing. You know, I use humor because I really don't want to talk about some things at times. But the truth is, I use humor to get close to people as well, and to be able to penetrate the various masks that we put on. Because, you know, the truth is, I mean, the most serious subjects that I know are always dealt better with humor. At least for me.
There's another hand up there. I think he has a joke. Okay, cool. Anyone with a joke to share?
Yes, please.
This is not a joke, but my question is for both of you. When you are writing, how much does it affect the writing that there is not an abundance of voices of your background? So in a way, it is a given that you will be taken as a representative of your background. How much does that affect you when you're writing? Do you worry about, maybe I shouldn't put this in because people are going to take it the wrong way, or they're going to, because they will look at me as a representative of my religion or my race or whatever?
Can I use bad language? Because I don't give a fuck. Okay? I mean, I've never cared. It's not my responsibility. It is not, I do not represent nobody. No one elected me as a representative of Lebanon. Although I keep thinking, if really there was a Muslim world and I was the caliph, there is quite a few men that I would like to see naked, and if that gives me that power, then I really want it. But other than that, I have absolutely no interest.
Very cool.
That was good.
Gentleman here.
My question is for Rabia. It's more about craft, and a question of language came up and humor came up. The characters in your works how do they, and the voices, how do they come to you? Do they come in the Ammiya, in Arabic, or do they come in English? A lot of the humor is situational, but also a lot of it is linguistic, and especially in the colloquial Arabic. And there's a lot of fun to be had with language. So what's the dynamic for you? Do you feel you're compromising a lot?
It is always a compromise. Primarily, it comes in English. When I'm writing, primarily I'm thinking in English. Sometimes something in Arabic will come up when I'm not writing, and that I can work into. I'm fascinated by the use of sort of argot and cliches, like something that would be a cliche in one language would not be in another. As a simple example, my favorite these days is Lebanese. We have a word that says "tizayn fardil bes," which, see, I can make people laugh. You want to compare like two people who look like each other, you say they're two butts in the same pair of pants. Okay. Now, in Lebanese, it's such a cliche almost. In English, it sounds funny.
Yeah.
So these are things that you use. But primarily, I do not translate. I am terrified of sounding like Melanie Griffith in shooting, Shining Through or whatever. Yeah. Here, taste my strudel. Doesn't work. So but it's not exactly English. Like even if he was born and raised here, his English is slightly different than either a Pakistani or an American. We all bring our own language, so it is my own language. It's not exactly Lebanese. It's not exactly American or whatever.
Eric, I'm aware that I have exceeded the time. However, should I? I certainly wanted to ask a question too, but I'll let this young gentleman.
You were?
Yeah, because I was bothered by something.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I saw this Grace and the Who and the What as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of your work can be interpreted as a critique in many different ways.
Yes.
Boss, take the microphone if you don't mind.
Thank you. So a lot of people can interpret your work as a critique of either the religion or what it means to be Pakistani in New York, or maybe even the American system in itself. Do you see your own work as a critique one way or the other, or do you think these are just interpretations that the audience has imposed on your work?
I don't want to answer your question. Thank you for asking that very difficult question. I believe, and this is going to sound, this is a diversion through pretentiousness, that Percy Shelley is right, that poets and philosophers are the unacknowledged legislators of mankind. Anybody who does not believe that need look no further in a late capitalist market economy than Kim Kardashian to understand that we receive our ideals and our notions of comportment from narrative, often popular. I think it is the job of an artist to question, provoke, and tease the conscience of the culture. And the greatest of our artists tease the conscience of our species. So I think provocation is part and parcel of how I see art. Another ridiculously pretentious diversion. Adorno once said, every great work of art is actually a criminal act. So that's an aspiration to part of what I'm doing. The who and the what is certainly a challenge to the received notion of the prophet. Amir is certainly trying to deconstruct, drunk as he is, the so-called Islamic mythos. How the audience receives that is really up to them. Amir's discourse has been placed within a situation of dramatic irony that allows it to have a multivalence, to use a word Amitava used earlier, that it's not clear what Amir is saying, and it's certainly not clear what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I really don't want to test anyone's patience, but I did have a quick question for each one of them, if you don't mind. There's a lovely exchange that happens when Jory is leaving the stage.
Mm-hmm.
She says, the very, very quick knife thrusts that she makes. And the last thing she says is, and Mort, your friend Mort, says that you are duplicitous.
Mm-hmm.
and therefore you make a good litigator.
Right.
But that is what makes you untrustworthy.
Right.
And I thought that's also a metaphor for a writer. A writer, and a writer like you, is duplicitous in the best sense because you're occupying different positions all the time. When you witness your performance, when we witness your play, we are seeing the argument shift. But that is what I suppose makes us trust you. Would you go with that, really?
Well, I think the notion of duplicity and disgrace is a very complex one because it's, of course, an Islamophobic trope that the Muslim is duplicitous.
Yeah.
And so she's repeating back what the audience, right, exactly. And so there's that level, but of course there's also the level that, Picasso once said, art is the lie that tells the truth, which I think is what you're suggesting by saying that an artist exists in a kind of non-local, there's a constantly shifting non-local consciousness. And I think that's right.
And so, if I might...
I'm fine.
I love the fact that your protagonist has read everyone in the world, It intimidated me. I'm supposed to be an English professor, and I was like shading my eyes with every lovely reference, just the apt quote from the writers of the world. What distressed me, or what made me wonder on her behalf, was she, in Beirut, has read everyone, but has everyone that she worships read her? You know what I'm saying? By which I simply mean the way a writer in Lebanon knows the writers of the world. Is the writer in Lebanon accorded the same respect? I mean, it's great that you're on the short list, but how many folks from Beirut have we seen on that list? You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's a problem, and it's not just Beirut. It's a problem of what we consider worthy of being read.
Yes.
And those that are considered unnecessary. And for a lot of people here, almost the entire world is unnecessary. And as long as we get our iPhone, who cares how many Chinese die?
Yeah.
And it's just a constant. I mean, this is a capitalist, whatever you want to call it. As long as we get our comforts, we can drone the hell out of everybody else, let alone the literature. Please.
Talking of drones, they make a dramatic entry in the play that is opening on December 8th. Check it out.
Thank you.
You've been a great audience. Thank you so much. Thank you.